Evening, everyone. Hello, how are we all? So, Nigel Farage again. He has been behaving, Farage, like a proper little Karen this week, hasn't he? So I just want to try and show you a couple of things. I may have to grab my, where's my, I have to grab my earphones for part of it. So, Keir Starmer gave his speech at the Labour Party conference, in which he was finally fairly combative, not as combative as I would like. Not as combative. I don't want him to be divisive as such, but I do want him to call out Nigel Farage a bit more. But, you know, he gave it a go. And then Nigel Farage pretty much straight away after the speech said, oh, I'm going to give my response in a couple of hours. And he came out with his response. And his response was, oh, it's disgusting. I thought Keir Starmer was all right. This is absolutely disgusting. He should be ashamed of himself, and I hope when he wakes up in the next morning he is ashamed of himself. So what was so awful that Keir Starmer had said about Nigel Farage, right? Well, he'd called his latest policy, this thing about just banning all indefinite leave to remain, as racist, and he said that Nigel Farage did not strike him as the sort of person who wants to serve the whole country. And surely this is obvious. I mean, compare him to Trump. Trump recently, right, said, I can't remember his exact words, probably should have looked them up, but Trump has basically said publicly, recently, at that Charlie Kirk memorial thing, he doesn't want to be the president for all Americans. He said, as far as I'm concerned, you know, if you're my opponent, I actually don't want you to have a nice life. I can't remember the exact words, but he was basically making it clear he only cares about the people who support him, right? So Trump is that sort of president very explicitly. Farage, of course, looks up to him. But Farage also is saying the same thing, isn't he? Because Keir Starmer wasn't saying that, like I would have said, Nigel Farage only looks after Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage only cares about himself, and he will abuse his office to further his own greedy, insatiable appetite. That's what I would have said. Starmer didn't say that. He didn't go anywhere near that. He just said he didn't believe Nigel Farage would serve the whole country. Right? What's so shocking about that? But Nigel Farage, proper little Karen, threw a proper wobbly, right? Then you had Richard Tice, okay? Richard Tice complaining that Keir Starmer had said, in fact, Richard Tice's exact words were, he literally said, take up arms against the enemy. No, he didn't. No, he didn't at all. You know, what he said is, he used the word fight. He said, we must fight reform, but you use the word fight a lot in politics, don't you? Nigel Farage has used the word plenty of times. But I just want to show you something here. When we're talking about language, right? Talking about language. Let me just make sure I can listen to it as well to make sure that it comes across all right. I'm making sure I haven't muted my speakers. So this is from 2019. Haggis on Twitter, as some of you may know, is absolutely a hero at clipping these
Just
things.
something that's been a big story here in the UK recently. Given an anti-Brexit MP, Jo Cox was murdered in the middle of the referendum campaign by a white nationalist who considered her to be a collaborator and a traitor. Do you think it's wise right now that politicians constantly talk of betrayal, of traitors, of surrender? Isn't it irresponsible for your party leader, Nigel Farage, to talk about picking up a rifle if Brexit isn't delivered, of taking a knife to civil servants in London? Is this not dangerous stuff, Richard?
Look, the word surrender is a normal part of the English language, just like betrayal. If we can't use simple language like that, then actually you are preventing free speech.
Right, so he says if you can't use words like that, you're preventing free speech. So Keir Starmer, the only hurty word he said was fight. That was it. Right, here's the thing. Em's just made a little comment there. I will be asking psychiatrists, don't worry, I haven't read your comment there. But, you know, autism apparently makes you take things too literally. My wife thinks I take things too literally, but I'm not that literal. I understand if a politician says they need to fight something, it's not Queensberry rules, right? They're not going to punch anyone in the face. Maybe Lee Anderson, he sometimes seems to be a bit on the edge. But when Nigel Farage says, I'm going to fight something, I don't think he means he's going to deck someone, right? Same with Keir Starmer. But this goes back, that journalist was asking Richard Tice about two specific things there. In 2019, when everything went to shit, right, politically in this country, obviously it had its roots before then, but that's when everything just went wobbly. Nigel Farage did say that if Brexit were not delivered, he would take up a rifle and take to the streets. That's not a metaphor. Non-autistic people can back me up. That's not a metaphor. That is a specific description of violence, right? It's not like, you know, when you say slashing red tape. Slashing red tape, we know, is an administrative process. We don't have a picture of civil servants or politicians with a cavalry sabre attacking a filing cabinet, right? So that's slashing red tape is a metaphor. Fighting, taking the fight to Reform UK or Labour or the Conservatives or whoever that's a metaphor, right? Surrender even is a metaphor. Betrayal can be a metaphor, right? Even treason. I mean, I tend not to use the word traitor or treason too much because it gets overused in politics, and it's a word that's deliberately designed to inflame tensions, so I don't like it. But, you know, people use it metaphorically. But if you say, if I don't get my way, if you say, if the government do not do this thing, I'm going to take up a rifle and go onto the streets, that is a specific threat of violence. If you say, take a knife to civil servants in London, that's not take a knife even to the civil service, which is, even that's a bit graphic. No, to civil servants. That's a specific threat of violence. And yet Nigel Farage felt justified in using those terms. And I will just point out, by the way, he did not have PC Plod tapping him on the shoulder over it. He was not even questioned about the possibility of hate speech for doing that or threats of violence. You know, he considered that, and Richard Tice in that interview considered that just to be words used in politics, which is absolute bollocks. So now Keir Starmer says we need to take the fight to, in fact, what was his exact? I've got them written down somewhere. He says we must come together to fight reform. He said we must go into the battle armed. He did say that, battle. So he's, again, but that's a metaphor. And then with action. And then he went on to talk about the action he meant, which is delivering on like communities' needs. So the workers' rights, the houses, things like that. So he talked about specific policies that are designed to make people's lives better. And he actually said it. In fact, if I read it exactly, it says we must come together to fight reform, blah, blah, blah. We must go into the battle armed. And then he said with action. And that means tackling all the problems they prey upon. So he was very specific about the arms he was going to take into this battle. The arms were going to be making people's lives better. Farage is an absolute fanny. An absolute fanny. Really is. I think calling Farage a Karen is an insult to Karens. Can you insult Karens enough? They seem a bit obtuse to me, Karens. The only thing I don't like about that term is you run the risk of being accused of misogynistic. So I tend to steer clear of it myself. I'll usually just call someone like I put wet wipe on the thumbnail. That's my wife's word. Although she F's and blinds about bloody Karen sometimes on Facebook as well. Although I do call Elon Musk Space Karen. What we're going to call Farage? What is he? Racist Karen? Because that's another thing, right? Okay. Nigel Farage, the other thing he was flapping about is, oh, Keir Starmer called me racist. I had two thoughts to that. First one was, well, you are racist, really. Didn't he admit to being racist at one time as well? He basically said he was racist. But he is racist. But in actual fact, Keir Starmer didn't say he was racist either. He said that policy was racist. And, you know, if people are thinking, oh, well, if you're calling my policy racist, you must be calling me racist. No. Political leaders push policies all the time they don't really believe in. You can't have policies that only an absolute dictator can push policies that they 100% agree with. even absolute monarchs in our time, if you think about the kings and queens of England, say, have not been able to do exactly what they want because the odd king that's tried it has ended up with a poker up their arse. So, you know, even an absolute monarch has their barons that they've got to keep on side. There's your power base. No such thing really as an absolute dictator. Even Trump isn't getting to do exactly what he wants, although he doesn't seem to, you know, have too many people blocking him on much. But, you know, there's been the odd thing he's not happy with. And so, yeah, you know, Labour have some racist policies. Why didn't he just call some of their policies racist in return if he doesn't like it? But he didn't call him racist. In fact, the next day, Starmer actually said, no, he's not racist. He made it clear he was talking about his policies, not him. Now, if I was Starmer, I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have said he's not racist, because he is racist. I don't see the point in denying it. But he could have said, I didn't call him racist. I called one of his policies racist, right? One of his policies, no. I mean, most of them are racist. The ones that aren't just like, you know, pro-billionaire. And but I think if I was Starmer, and this is where I'd like to see him be a bit more combative. If I was Starmer, I might have said something like, when I was asked about it, I might have first of all been a bit exasperated and go, what's that wet white been whining about this time? What's wet white Nigel been whining about this time? Tell me again, what is it? What is it? I called him a racist? No, I didn't call him a racist. Next question, please. And just leave it at that. You don't have to elaborate. I don't know why some politicians feel that they have to elaborate. Don't have to. Learn from the masters, the populist masters. Nigel Farage never elaborates, does he? He doesn't elaborate. There's no need to. Just leave it open-ended. When you say, oh, he says you called him a racist. I didn't. Then it's up to them to try and say otherwise. Farage equals froggy carrot. No, I want something ruder than that. I also don't really want to pick on, like, you know, physical characteristics. Something about him. Racist Karen doesn't quite do it, because a lot of Karens are racist, aren't they? Doesn't really. Oh, Tim, going back to what Farage said in 2019, saying that would be a threat of terrorism, Phil. Well, it actually would be, yes, literally, because you're threatening violence for political purposes, which is classic terrorism. But he was not even, I don't remember him even being cautioned for it. Some politicians took an exception. There were politicians who said he shouldn't have been using language like that. I don't remember the police getting involved. There's his two-tier policing right there. There is his two. Also, okay, so a couple of people have been pointing out. Nigel Farage, right, who's taken exception to Keir Starmer talking clearly metaphorically about a battle, because he doesn't talk about rifles and knives. He talks about, oh, the weapons in this battle of ours are going to be making people's lives better. When was a literal battle ever making anyone's lives better? Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So, Nigel Farage, this man of peace, right? This man who only likes peaceful language, apparently. Who was his star guest at his conference? Someone famous for going to prison for calling for a hotel full of migrants, non-migrants and staff to be burned alive. I mean, was that supposed to be metaphorical? Let me have a look. Hold on. I'm going to have to look up the exact words again, aren't I? Can I find it? No. Because she deleted the tweet. It must still be up here somewhere. Here it is. This is what she said. Is this metaphorical as well? This is Nigel Farage's special guest at his Reform UK conference. Set fire to all the efforts. No, sorry. Set fire to all the. It's because it's starred out, you see. Set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bees for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. So she called She called for the hotel, or in fact multiple hotels, now that I read it, to be set fire to with people inside it. And she specifically called for the government and politicians she didn't approve of to go in there as well, to be set fire as well. That's not metaphorical. That is again a specific threat of violence. And she was doing it at the same time as there was a violent mob with torches and not quite pitchforks, baseball bats, who were marching on a hotel specifically for that purpose. Reform UK would have us thrown into the Warhammer 40k timeline. Well, it would, wouldn't it? The grim dark. Anyway, I'll catch up with some comments here. Have we gone from pineapples to pokers now? No, we use pineapples these days because we're more sophisticated, we're more civilised. They use pokers. What was it? I can't remember exactly when it was. It was during the medieval period. Was it Edward II? I'm also not too hot on these. I'm not a historian. Sorry, I get the odd. But it might have been Edward II who ended up. And even then, I think it was rumoured. I don't think we've got definitive historical proof. But he was certainly murdered. He was murdered because his barons didn't approve of him. He shit the bed, and so they took him out. They may or may not have taken him out in the most painful way possible. David there said, I don't think he's ignorant. I assume we're talking about Farage here. I think he's a very clever man with a talent for knowing what buttons he can press to get the reactions he wants. Shit stirrer. I think he probably is clever, but I am going to say you don't need to be clever to press those buttons. They're actually really easy. Trump is not clever. He can press them. In fact, if anything, I would say he presses them better than Farage. It's instinctive. You can literally be fed these lines. You don't have to be. And this is why it's not proof that Farage is clever that he does these things. I think he probably is clever, but it's not proof of cleverness to be able to do these things, because you get dumb people can do it as well. If you don't care about fracturing society, it's actually easy. It's stunningly easy. All you have to do is understand the basic psychology. You just have to understand, because like I've said in those recent videos, it's literally like your brain. I mean, there's lots of bits of the brain, but in terms of like engagement like this, you can think of the brain as having two bits. There's the very clever bit that's capable of rational thought and critical thinking and all the rest of it. And then there's the more primal emotional center in the brain, the amygdala, the lizard brain, I call it, which takes over. If you stimulate it, it takes over. It's superior. And it has to be that to get you to run away from the saber-toothed tiger. It's an essential survival mechanism. It's an absolutely essential survival mechanism, that emotional center in your brain can take over the rational center of your brain. So all you have to know how to do is trigger that irrational center in the brain, that emotional center. You don't have to be clever to do it. You don't even have to think on the fly. Like, one reason why I only say I think Farage is clever and I don't know it is because when he's put under pressure, he wilts, right? He goes to pieces. Now, is that because he can't think his way out of a problem, and that whenever he goes to an interview or is interviewed, he just goes in with pre-arranged lines, which could be someone else's lines. He might pay for someone else to write them for him, for all I know, right? But he goes there with his pre-prepared lines. He is not thinking them on the fly. And then when he's asked to, like, say something where his pre-prepared lines don't work, he gets quite nasty. Now, is he doing that because he's not actually that clever and he cannot think his way around these challenges? Or is it just because that's an effective tactic as well, to get angry and to make out that your interviewer is politically motivated and they're biased and all the rest of it? I mean, if so, maybe Starmer should do a bit more of that. Turn things on them. John, they're saying, I've noticed the Daily Telegraph have even published an article highlighting Farage's pro-Russian links and history of defending Putin's actions. Are they? I haven't seen that then. I wonder how prominently, though. Because, you may have said it as well, but someone said it, they certainly haven't been highlighting they haven't been asking Nigel Farage the questions related to Nathan Gill they should ask. Because I will say, and I will say again, Nathan Gill, for those who don't know, very close to Farage, former UKIP MEP, but he's admitted to accepting bribes from Russia in return for making pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament. And these episodes occurred after he left UKIP with Farage. He left UKIP at the same, literally 2 days after Farage. So he's done it whilst he's been with Farage. He was then a Brexit Party MEP. So obviously Farage, let him do that. And then Farage made him the leader of Welsh Reform UK. So he's clearly close to Farage. And if the Russians bribed him, surely they approached Farage. And also Farage asked the same sort of questions, the same sort of pro-Russian questions, and made pro-Russian statements. So the question that Farage should be asked is, did you do that for free then? Because the Russian state were paying your mate Nathan to say those things. You said the same things. Were you doing it for free, or did they bribe you as well? Right? And if I was Starmer, I'd be asking those questions. If the journalists won't do it, Starmer should do it. Because the thing is, right, here's the thing. This is how it's really easy for Farage and really difficult for other most sensible political leaders, in that saying things that trigger that emotional centre is usually putting yourself, you're creating a them and us situation, and that's populism. I don't like that. It's divisive and it's setting people against each other. I don't like divide and rule. I don't approve of any tactics that are based on it. But so it is difficult to hit those emotional centres without sullying yourself like that, but it's not impossible. So if you want to get yourself in the papers, you need to say something outrageous. Outrageous usually means attacking a group in society, which Labour shouldn't do. I mean, they are doing, but they shouldn't. But what you can do is attack an individual. What's wrong with attacking an individual? So what was wrong with Keir Starmer? In fact, I mean, if we can go back to when Keir Starmer was asked, should we refine it? When he was told, oh, Nigel Farage is upset with you, Prime Minister. Really? Why? Because you said he was racist. I said, oh, what's this wet white been whining about now? Racist? Racist? I said his policy's racist. That's what I said. Oh, while we're on the subject, have you asked him yet if, given that his friend Nathan Gill has admitted multiple counts of accepting Russian bribes in order for making pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament, given that Nigel Farage made the same sort of statements himself, have you asked Nigel Farage if he did that for free or if he did it in return for Russian money? Right? That's what Starmer should have said. Stop being defensive about everything. So what Starmer actually said was, he's not racist. I talked about his policy or something like that. I can't remember his exact words, but he did specifically say Farage isn't racist. No need for that. Turn everything like that, turn every attack, counterattack it. Counterattack. I used to love the old counterattack when I did judo. I used to do judo a long time ago. And I was a bit of a bugger for that. I used to love counterattacking, which was sometimes a bit of a problem. I sometimes got done for being too passive because I was literally waiting for an attack so I could counter it rather than taking the initiative myself too often. But that's what you should do. Turn every attack against him. Instead of being defensive, because that was a defensive answer he gave. Don't do that. Attack. Always attack. Nigel Farage is easy to attack. And again, you don't have to think on the fly. You can have these pre-prepared lines. Every single time. And I've said this in a video recently, like, let's go through some. If I were advising Keir Starmer, do you know what? He should talk to me. Never mind Gary Stevenson, I don't know, he knows nothing, by the way, about political science. I will say that till I'm blue in the face, right? He don't need to listen to Gary Stevenson. He should listen to me, though. Although I'm not going to do a video whining about the fact he's not doing. But I'll sit down with him. I'll say, right, every time, and I'll give him scenarios. Every time you're asked about channel crossings, right, answer the question as you would. But before it, say, you mean the Farage boats? Because Starmer's already come up with that line. Use it, right? So every time you're asked about the the channel crossings begin by saying, oh, you mean the Farage boats? Right, yeah, let me tell you about that then. Every time he's asked a question about immigration, just say, well, let me just make sure I draw a distinction with the racist policies of Nigel Farage. By the way, have you asked him if he made the same sort of statements as Nathan Gill for free or for Russian money? Put it in, like literally, in fact, you can put that in anything. You can literally put that in anything. Anytime anyone asks you a question that references Nigel Farage, you can say to that journalist, by the way, have you asked him who really paid for that house in Clacton? Or you can say, have you asked him whether he made those same sort of pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament as his mate Nathan Gill for money, for Russian rubles, or doing it for free? Put that into everything, literally everything. And then if he's asked more specific questions, let's say he's asked about the NHS. Oh, the NHS, that'll be the thing that Nigel Farage wants to privatise. Yeah, let me tell you about that. If he's asked about workers' rights. Oh, the workers' rights that Nigel Farage voted against. Yeah, let me tell you about our workers' rights. Renters' rights, same thing. Housing, affordable housing. Cheaper, cost of living crisis. If you're asked about the cost of living crisis, say, yeah, the cost of living crisis driven largely by energy bills that we're going to be reducing with our move to renewable energy that Nigel Farage opposes. He wants you paying higher energy bills because he wants you in hock to Putin. Literally preface any. I think you could come up with about 10 lines, anti-Farage lines, that you could preface every question with. So you'd have some specific ones that go with specific policy areas, and then you have some generic ones. If they ask you a question that's not covered by one of the specific ones, you ask one of the generic ones, and you just keep doing it. You can have the same. You don't even have to come up with different ones. It's actually helpful if you don't have different ones. Have like 10 different ones, but don't recycle them. Don't change them as the year goes on. Keep doing it, and eventually it'll sink in. And the papers will love it because it's needle. They love it. It's like the boxing the weigh-in at a boxing match when they all have to like growl at each other for some bloody reason. It's because the audience like it. The punters love it. Will there? Starmer needs to be able to quote some quippy sound bites that Farage peddled in the EU Parliament that are instantly recognisable as Russian disinformation propaganda. Can he or are Nigel Farage's quotes not quippy? It doesn't even need to do that. I wouldn't even do that. Just talk in general terms, because you don't want to take ages over it. If you're asked a question or something, you don't want to spend a whole minute talking about Nigel Farage, right? You just want to get the boot in and then answer the question. Chris saying, I'd also be asking questions about his property in Clacton. I would. That shouldn't go away. Starmer's got two really, really very powerful lines against Farage right now. The first is, who paid for that house in Clacton? Because it weren't his partner. She ain't rich enough. I mean, there's no mortgage. Nigel Farage has insisted it was paid for outright. There was no mortgage. Someone has handed over a sack of cash for it. She ain't got enough cash. Right? She ain't got enough cash. So who bought it? Don't even worry about the reasons why he didn't buy it. Forget about that. You can go on to it if the thing moves on. But for now, just to get it in people's heads, who paid for that house? Because he's lying to you. And you can say that because he is lying to you. It's reasonable to suppose that Nigel Farage is lying about who paid for that house, because it's... Again, Nigel Farage can't sue him for defamation. Well, he can try. Try taking on a lawyer, a top lawyer, if you like. But it won't work, because to win a defamation... And that'd be great headlines. I'd love that if I were the Prime Minister, because you might think, oh, ball ache, you don't want to get sued. No. If I were Prime Minister, honestly, I'd be way more combative than Starmer is. I'd love it if Nigel Farage sued me, because he couldn't win. No chance of winning, right? Because Starmer's rich enough to defend himself. I mean, obviously, he wouldn't use public money to defend himself. He used his own money, but that's fine. Get it back off Nigel Farage later. He would win, because for defamation, there's a very high bar for defamation. And all Starmer has to be able to demonstrate is there's reasonable cause to say what he said, and he's in the clear. It doesn't matter whether it's even true. Nigel Farage can come to court with definitive documentary proof that actually his partner did buy the house with her own money. It didn't come from anywhere else. That still wouldn't be a gotcha, because it's reasonable to suppose his partner doesn't have that much money. She's not that wealthy. You know, Nigel Farage tried to say her wealth came from her parents. Her parents live in a property that's like, it's basically worth roughly the same as my wife's house that I'm in now. It may be a bit more, but not much more. It's really not like, her parents are not that wealthy that they can chuck her £1 million for an house. She's not that wealthy. Even if she has about £1 million in net worth, when someone's worth £1 million, they don't have £1 million in the bank. There is no one in the world who has £1 million in the bank and that is it. That is their entire, you know, if you have £1 million in the bank, you will have property that's worth even more. Because why would you have £1 million in the bank? That's not doing anything. If you've got £1 million, you do something with it. I mean, your first thing is, if you don't own a house, you buy a house, right? If you do own a house, you invest it. You have some money in the only money you have in the bank, if you've got money, the only money you have in the bank is what you need for cash flow purposes. Anything else, because it just sits there, it doesn't earn anything. Like, there's a little bit, even in a savings account, the amount of interest you earn in a savings account is less than inflation. So even in a savings account, your money is becoming less valuable by leaving it in there. So you don't do that. So, you know, even if her net worth is £1 million, she didn't have £1 million worth of cash to buy a house with. So she ain't bought it. Keep going on about it, just like I'm going on about it. Starmer should as well. Go on about it. Starmer's short of street smarts as far as I'm concerned. Oh, he definitely is. Yeah, there's no question about that. One could be well mannered and break one off in someone in Farage. Starmer's other problem is hidden agendas. Everyone's got hidden agendas. You can't handle the truth, you see. So that's why I talk about in politics, there's honesty and then there's political honesty for me. And what I mean by honesty, see, honesty for me is what the hell? Someone's sending me some bullshit here. I don't know what the hell that is. Honesty for me is telling the truth to the best of my ability. And when I say I'll do a thing, doing it. And when I say I won't do a thing, not doing it, right? That's honesty. That's the honesty we all understand. Political honesty, for me, is just if you say you'll do a thing, do it to the best of your ability. And if you say you won't do a thing, don't do it to the best of your ability, right? It doesn't mean tell the truth, because the public do not reward politicians for telling the truth. And anyone who says, oh, I like that politician because they tell the truth, they ain't telling you the truth. They're just telling you what you believe, right? So the public do not reward honesty in politics. Therefore, any politician who's honest is... any politician who says they're honest is a liar. And any politician who is honest, you will never have heard of them, because they will never make it in politics. They might just about make it as a backbench MP in a safe seat for their party, or like a councillor or something. That'll be it. I'll go to David there saying, yeah, the best thing about Farage suing Starmer is it will generate loads of headlines. Yeah, it'd be brilliant. And the payoff would be fantastic, because Starmer couldn't lose. You know, to win a defamation case for that, Farage would have to be able to prove in court that Starmer knew he was lying, that he had no good reason to believe it. Also, the public interest thing. So Starmer will claim the public interest debate. It is a matter of public interest, because if Farage's partner hasn't bought that house, that means someone else has. Who's that someone else? Right? If it's Nigel Farage, he's broken the law, he's broken tax laws, right? If it's someone else who also owns a property, they've broken tax, or someone's broken tax laws, because the stamp duty paid on it was the stamp duty you'd pay if it was the only property you owned, if you don't own any other property. So the only way tax law hasn't been broken is if that house was paid for by someone who doesn't own property in this country. So there's a public interest angle to it that Starmer can claim, and he can claim it's reasonable that his supposition that Farage's partner didn't pay for it is reasonable, totally reasonable. Starmer should do that. He should go on about it. And do you know what? Because you know what? Farage won't threaten to sue him. He won't. But if Starmer wanted to be really combative, if he wanted to crank it up another level, right? After he said this, he could say, once it's happened a few times, once he's used it a few times and Nigel Farage is getting a bit shirty, Starmer could say, Nigel Farage, the old wet wipe there, he's getting a bit frustrated by all this, getting a bit frustrated. Why don't you sue me, Nigel? Huh? Why don't you sue me? Try that. Brian there saying, actually, Phil, if I had £1 million in the bank, I probably wouldn't be sat in my pants watching you right now, not while hotel rooms in Corsica are available for tomorrow. Well, you can soon blow £1 million if you get a bit lavish, you know. Best thing to do, you'd buy a house if you don't already have one, and then you would just invest. You'd give yourself a bit, you keep a few grand in the bank for cash flow, like. But that's what rich people do. Rich people don't have cash in the bank. They don't have money in the bank. Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter, he didn't pay, like, he was worth hundreds of billions. Even at the time, he was worth like $250 billion or something, wasn't he? And he paid like 42 billion. So he had more than enough wealth to buy it, but he didn't buy it. He borrowed the money for it because he didn't physically have 42 billion, even though he was worth about 200 odd billion dollars. He didn't have 42 billion dollars to pay for the shares. He didn't physically have the money because his wealth is tied up in his own investments, his own shares. So, people just don't have money in the bank. Apart from, ironically, that's why a lot of people get confused when we talk about wealth. A lot of people don't understand wealth, and it's why it's easy for populists to send them astray, because people don't understand wealth, because they don't get that wealth doesn't exist as money. If someone's wealthy, they don't have money. They have enough in the bank just to sort themselves out. But wealthy people are constantly taking out loans and stuff. I mean, sometimes that's a tax fiddle as well. They don't have money. Ordinary people have money. It's just people like you and I are the ones with money. We have money. But people that have got a lot of wealth don't have money. Money just devalues. If you've got savings in your bank, I've got a savings account. I've got a few £1,000 saving for rainy day money, but it's not worth as much as it was last year because of inflation. Like, if you think about yourself, you've got some money in a savings account for, if your boiler blows up or something, you need a new boiler. So think about it this way. So let's say, a new boiler costs, the one you'd want, say £2,000, for fitting and everything, right? Say. And so you think, I'd better have like £2,500 in the bank just to cover an emergency, because that's your big emergency, something like that. And then let's say a few years later your boiler does pack up, you need a new one, then you find out it's £3,000 and you ain't got enough. Because that's what I mean. The money just gets less and less in terms of how valuable it is. So you don't have money. You have assets. You have shares. You have property. You have things that you need. If you've got a lot of money, you need to put it into something where that pot will grow faster than inflation. Because if it grows less fast than inflation, you're not making money. If someone thinks in their savings account, they may, I made like 60 quid interest last year. No, you didn't. You lost money. You lost money. Because whatever amount of money would get you £60 interest in a single year is worth a lot less now. Anyway, Wilf going there, suspicious because what was the loan in exchange for? Can we, the public, be certain it wasn't for political favours? Which loan? So we could be talking about any number of loans now. If you mean for Elon Musk, he borrowed money from quite a lot of people, including people with links to Russia. The Russian oligarch in there, in the list of people who gave him them. So, I mean, this is the thing about Elon Musk, right? This is what sounds mad. If you sit down just like Dave in the pub, right, and let me try and explain something to you, which for ordinary people sounds crazy. They can't work it out, which is why it's so easy to send people wrong on the economy because they don't understand wealth, right? So, at the time Elon Musk bought Twitter, I think he was worth about $250 billion. Let's just say for the sake of it was about that, right? So he's worth $250 billion. He buys Twitter for $42 billion, right? So you think to yourself, oh, he's worth just over about $200 billion then, right? No, he hasn't used his $250 billion to buy Twitter. He set up a complex series of loans to buy Twitter, right? So he's now liable for it. So if he had to cough up, he would have to sell a load of his Tesla shares and stuff like that to pay for it. And he did have to do a bit of that. He did have to sell some of his Tesla shares, I think, for some of those Twitter shares, basically, to buy it. But he took it in the form of loans. So he's now having to service those loans, right? Before the US presidential election, Elon Musk openly said, if Trump loses the election, he's effed, he said, right? He said he's completely effed. And you think, why? And the reason is because he was struggling, because Twitter was massively devalued. You know, he paid $42 billion for it. It wasn't worth that much when he bought it. It's certainly not that worth once he'd taken a hatchet to it. Particularly after he told all the advertisers to piss off, then they did, then he whined that they all pissed off. He said, because they were going on about, well, if you don't like it, why don't you stop advertising then? So they did. Why have you stopped advertising? Anyway, he wouldn't be able to service the loans. And you think, how's that? He's worth $250 billion. How could he, why don't he just sell a load of his shares and then pay off those debts? Well, that's what he'd have to do. But he don't want to do that because then he'd have to be selling about $40 billion worth of shares. And those shares are worth more than $40 billion because they grow over time. Like now, those $40 billion, because he could have done that. He could have just sold $40 billion worth of shares, which would have reduced his own power within those companies. And then, because each of those shares is voting rights for him as well, remember, he doesn't own Tesla. He's the CEO of Tesla. He doesn't own it. But he still has a big stake in it. And that's voting rights. And he owns some other things. So again, if he sells shares in them, he might lose majority control. But he loses a measure of his control in those companies. But also, like, he knew he wasn't going to be growing Tesla's value. So if he spent $50 billion or $42 billion worth of profitable shares on Twitter, where he knew he was going to end up devaluing it, maintaining its value at best, that would be a mad decision for a wealthy person to make. But anyway, YouTube streams are rubbish for comment organisation. Yeah, sorry. I really wish Labour would employ a good attack dog advisor. See, they may have them and they may be ignoring them. What they need to do probably is sack the people who are keeping the attack dog advisors in their kennels. Because I'll tell you something, Labour, I mean, they've got hundreds of MPs and they've got loads of staff, loads of people working at Labour HQ in various capacities. Some of them are bound to be really good at this. I'm not a guru on this sort of stuff. There's loads of people who know how to give it some, right? I mean, the last Labour leader, I think, who was really good at it was John Smith. But, you know, you do get people, even if they don't rise to the top of politics, there's always people around them that can give them those lines. Like Tony Blair had Alistair Campbell, for example, right? They'll be there. They'll be there in Labour. They're just being kept in their kennel by pissing Morgan McSweeney or someone. Or maybe even Keir Starmer. Maybe Keir Starmer just doesn't want to be in your face. But, you know, that's disappointing. Oh, yeah, Vince there saying, yeah, when the Glazers bought Manchester United, they got the debt transferred to the clubs. They got it for nothing, yeah. It's how it works. And it's completely baffling to Dave in the pub. They can't get their head around it, which is why economics is a really fraught discussion area. Because you can talk about a lot of policy areas with people. You can talk about healthcare policy, education policy. You know, you can talk about all sorts of things that directly impact people's lives. Whereas the economy is too far removed from people's understanding and wealth as well. You know, they cannot get it in their heads how Elon Musk paid $42 billion for Twitter, and he was worth 6 times as much, and yet he didn't use any of his own wealth to buy it, really, or very little of his own wealth to buy it. You know, because that's what you think to yourself. You think, why? Because a normal person thinks to themselves, right, if you get a loan for something, if you have a loan, you only get it like because you're going to pay interest on it. So if you, for example, need to pay some, if you need £1,000, you need to buy something for £1,000, right? And if you've got that money in the bank, you wouldn't get a loan to pay for it because you know you're going to pay more than £1,000 back. That makes no sense. So the idea of rich people taking out loans for tens of billions when you're worth hundreds of billions makes no sense to the average person. Why would you do that? Because that's going to cost you more. No, it costs them less because their repayments on those loans will be less. Keeping their shares is worth more to them. Anyway, going back to the Nigel Farage partner house, what if the partner bought it with cash she received in a mate's loan from an uber wealthy reform backer? No laws broken then, as far as I can tell, just suspicious. Yes, that's possible. That is possible, yeah. And that would then potentially mean no laws are broken, yeah. But we still need to know, don't we? Well, we don't need to know, but we should know. Because that's only one possibility. And Nigel Farage hasn't said that's happened. He didn't say that she's been loaned the money to buy it. He said there was no mortgage, but, you know, that would be with a bank, right? She could still be loaned it on a friendly handshake agreement with someone. He says he didn't explicitly say she got the money from her parents. He alluded to the fact that her family has wealth. Her family doesn't have wealth. They're like middle class. I mean, they're not poor, but they don't live in a mansion. So how is it that if her parents just live in a normal house, like an everyday house, that they can afford to give their daughter enough money to buy an actual mansion in Clacton? Mike Tapp is arguably Labour MP's most appealing to Reform UK voters, a rising star. Yeah, I'm not sure that he's necessarily got Labour's best interests at heart. What you ideally want is someone who can talk to those types of voters in terms that's useful for Labour, which is not to say someone who just wants to, someone who looks like they'd probably be more at home in Reform UK. Wes Streeting was quite passionately attacking Farage on the Newsagent podcast. Really hope he continues. He's a good attack dog when he's allowed off his leash. He is quite good for that. As many of you will know, I don't broadly approve of Wes Streeting. He's very divisive. But at the end of the day, I think you missed my comment. Sorry, Emma, I have. Yeah, it happens a lot. At the end of the day, someone who's divisive does tend to be quite good at that as well, don't they? So at least he's useful for some things. And he is a good attack dog. Rayner was a good attack dog as well. Neither of them are used that much, though. I think both Rayner and Streeting have been underused. So it's like, again, this will come from, I don't want to put everything on McSweeney, right? But, you know, this is clearly coming from centrally from Downing Street, that they want, like, we know this for a fact, that Morgan McSweeney is the one advising Starmer to come across as the technocrat. It's a role he's playing very well, isn't it? I think people want to be assured that he's competent, so that side of the technocrat is good, knows what he's doing, calm, you know. But that doesn't mean to say you can't give him a bit of needle back. You can be like Game of Thrones, the Lannister character, the Charles Dance character, right? The Lannister patriarch. Forgotten his name. Sorry, I only watched it through once. His character, though, that's the ideal political leader, because he was calm, assured. Right, he came across very calm, very assured, didn't get flapped, right? But there was an edge to him, right? That's what you want. That's actually, someone tell me his name. Can't remember this bastard name, but the Charles Dance character, Tywin Lannister, was it? Okay, thank you. That is, I know he was an evil bastard, but you know everyone's evil in Game of Thrones, right? But that's a politician. That's a political leader, because he was calm, measured, didn't panic, but he had an edge to him. He had an edge. You know, he would smile with like bared fangs. That's your ideal sort of political leader. Street is my constituency MP, has been a good MP for me. Well, it'll be quite difficult at the moment, to be fair, but as long as the office does something. Obviously, when you're a minister, you can't do that much. Although he only just shaded it, didn't he? He only just shaded it. He's going to have to hope that the NHS is working magically at the next election, otherwise he could be in trouble. Charles Dance can do that hidden power thing. Anyway, he was a great patrician in Going Postal. Yeah, he's a good actor, right? But nonetheless, that is what I'm saying, is that sort of thing is what you want to emulate as a political leader. You know, not evil. I don't mean his like evil deeds, but in terms of his manner, that's what you want. Calm, totally calm. You know, when everyone else is panicking, you just go, "Oh, look at that! They're all panicking there." What was it? Wellington said, "Flapping around like a lot of wet hens." No need for that. No need for that. But then there's an edge. There's just that little air of menace. I saw something suggesting Rayner maybe come back into the cabinet. I mean, I don't think it's going to be imminent. I know Streeting made a big song and dance about him wanting her back. The thing is, Labour can openly say that. Rayner hasn't actually done anything like badly wrong. She's used poor judgment in cutting corners. But if you think about it, and I did do a video on this, if you think about what Rayner did, she didn't abuse her office. It had nothing to do with her role as a minister. She didn't do anything dodgy. Plenty of ministers have in the past and they've still come back, right? Priti Patel literally went behind her government's back to talk to a foreign power, and she was made Home Secretary a couple of years later. Different Prime Minister, admittedly. But yeah, Rayner didn't abuse her office, and she didn't do anything that was, you know, like a problem for her department either. None of it really reflected on her department, and she didn't abuse her powers. So like, it was poor judgment. Although the same rationale could equally apply to Louise Haigh, I will say. I strongly suspect Starmer wants Rayner back before Haigh, but it can apply to both of them. Neither Rayner nor Louise Haigh abused their office in any way, shape or form. There's not even a suggestion of it. For me to say, I always wondered why I like Starmer more than not, and I think it's because I'm a technocrat too. I mean, I tend not to like or dislike anyone. I just sort of think certain people are good for certain jobs. Morgan McSweeney is not a good chief of staff. I have got no grudge against him. I've got no problem with him going off and working for Labour's campaign. If he's a good campaigner, he is a good campaigner. So he can do that. He's not a good he's not a good political advisor, and he's not a good chief of staff. Starmer would be a perfectly good Prime Minister if he just had better political advice. Overnight, it would be a completely different person. You'd think he was a completely different person. A lot of politics is showmanship. A lot of it is showmanship. You know, political leaders would be very different with different advisors. David, they say, I want to talk about the PPE contracts. Watch the documentary today, even more shocking than I thought. Well, in terms of that, I don't know whether you've seen, I don't know if you're on Twitter. If you look up Dan Needle on Twitter, the old tax lawyer, he had interesting things to say about PPE MedPro. So I've not seen the documentary, but I I've read quite a few things about it, and one thing that Dan Needle points out, which is curious, he says, so Doug Barrowman, who's the guy who basically put it together, is saying, they're now saying, oh, you won't get the money from us, you're going to have to go after other people, right? Because he's saying that PPE MedPro was set up as a consortium. It was set up as more than that. So he said himself, they set it up as a British-based company because the government would more likely deal with a British-based company. So he's basically admitting a bit of dishonesty straight away. But what Dan Needle points out, he says that's normal. It is normal to set up companies registered in the UK for things like that because, yes, the government does prefer dealing with companies based in the UK, sure. But what's interesting is there are 2 PPE MedPros, 2 of them, set up by Doug Barrowman. And here's where Dan Needle reckons, no matter where the money is, there could be problems. Because which PPE MedPro has to pay the money back? There's deliberate, underhanded dodginess to this entire thing. Really. I strongly suspect, the way I'm reading it from experts, we're probably not going to get the money back. So the only sense of justice there will be is if the criminal investigation goes somewhere. SVAX there saying, I'd love to see Rayner and Haig back. Yes, so would I. Specifically, though, see, Rayner, I think she could do quite a few jobs in Cabinet. Louise Haig, I'm not so sure about, but she was good in transport. I'd like to see her back in transport because that's her big passion. She might not be that good in... Sometimes you can be really good in one role and not another. Rayner, I reckon, would be good, not in any role you gave her, but I think she'd be good in a few. She wouldn't have to go back to housing. In fact, I would strongly suggest she doesn't go back to housing, because housing is... There are certain departments where I don't think you should be messing about with the ministers. Housing's one of them. It's too important to Labour's election chances. So the departments I would not touch unless I absolutely had to, in terms of the staffing, would be housing, energy, healthcare, Treasury, so obviously Reeves. That's probably it. I think any others you could move people around. I don't want it happening too much, but anyway. How about both PPE MedPro? But there's a court decision. The court decision says PPE MedPro, but which they've both got identical names. Which one does it mean? That's where you've got another legal wrangle. You can't necessarily just say that. Legally, there's a company that's liable. The court has now said a particular company is liable for that money. But if there's 2 PPE MedPros, is it clear which one the court means? And even if it is it then clear? Because it might be in the court documents, it says the one registered in the UK. Because there's one registered in the UK and there's one registered in the Isle of Man. Right? So even if it's clear it's the UK-based one, well, then where's the money? Where's the money? Is that... So, you know what I mean? It gets complicated. And that complication isn't just because of the law. Doug Barrowman has deliberately set it up. He's deliberately set up banana skins for legal redress. Now, why would you do that unless you were expecting legal trouble later on? That's what I'd be saying. Why would you do that? I would put Rayner in the Home Office since Cooper's no longer there. Well, no, Mahmood's there now. Now, I actually wouldn't put her in the Home Office. I don't think that would be suitable at all. I would put her... You want a role where there's an absolute benefit in having... Because I think she's competent. So I think from that point of view, she could do a lot of jobs. But I would specifically, to maximise your benefit from her, put her in a role where there's a direct connection with working class communities. So housing was an obvious one. Healthcare in theory could be one, but I wouldn't want to monkey about with that. You know, education might be one. The Department for Work and Pensions in theory, but that is a pissing graveyard for ministers. You know, your career's basically over if you accept that job. That is a poison chalice and a half, that is. Even when times are good. the DWP is the most unpopular department there is. So you'd never want to accept that job unless you're desperate for a cabinet position. I was just thinking what would be... It doesn't really matter because it's not imminent anyway. We'll see where the chips fall. But there's no reason for her not to come back before the election. But as I said in my video, you bring her back... Basically, here's a timeline, right? So, I keep saying this time, 2 years' time, quite a lot of Labour's delivery will be evident, right? There'll be a lot of it evident. We'll have the best start centres. The workers' rights will be fully in place. People know about them. The renters' rights fully in place. The NHS should be better. The housing targets, if Labour are going to carry on with their housing targets, there will have to be really positive signs. There will have had to have been a significant... Because this time in 2027, Labour will have been in power for about, not quite 2.5 years, but over 2 years. So we should have seen a load of houses built, and we should see a load more underway. We might also see those 3 new towns, and there's more than 3 new towns planned, but the 3 new towns that are going to be underway before the election, hopefully will be underway. Maybe the water companies will be behaving themselves better. So there should be lots of tangible delivery, right? Tangible delivery. Hopefully energy bills even lower. But at that point, will the public appreciate it, and or will Labour's comms improve? So let's say it does. So let's say Labour have started to fight back by then. Let's say they're looking like they're on the up again. Maybe they've even caught up to Reform UK, maybe even overtaken them. Who knows? Let's think big. At that point, you could easily bring Rayner back again. She'll have served her... It'll be 2 years later. She'll have served her time for something that had nothing to do with her ministerial duties. No problem at all. The Tory press will go mad because they hate her. But that's fine. You're on the up. They can't really complain. She's done her time. She made a mistake. She made a careless error. She's paid her dues for it. Job done. The ministers have been brought back under far shadier circumstances. I mean, Peter Mandelson, every time he was kicked out of cabinet, it was for abusing his, or appearing to abuse his ministerial position. There wasn't always definitive proof, but there was enough. It looked dodgy enough, right, that he had to go. There was none of that with Rayner. Anyway, Vince there saying it's the new Northern Ireland job, political graveyard. Well, it is. Northern Ireland's all right now. If you've got the right minister there, that's okay. As long as you've got all you need for a Northern Ireland minister to be a perfectly comfortable job is to be able to have a good relationship with the various parties of Northern Ireland, the main parties. So as long as you're good at bridge building, then yeah, it's no longer a nightmare position. DWP always is though, because it's got the largest budget of any department. Because obviously there's literally everything gets paid out of the DWP, all benefits and pensions and state pensions and everything. So it's by far and away handles the most money of any individual government department, apart from I suppose the Treasury, which handles it all. But you know what I mean. In terms of spending it all, the DWP spends more than any other department, including the Department for Health and Social Care. And yet, most people resent that spending. So pensioners resent the in-work benefits. Working age people resent the pensions. Everyone resents the out-of-work benefits, apart from those out of work. So there's large chunks of voters that resent literally every penny the DWP spends. Terrible job. Get Rayner running the latest part of the Leveson cry. Well, that'll be fun. Yeah, that's an idea. So you could bring her back as Minister without portfolio, or Minister without a department. So she wouldn't have to be a Secretary of State. You could just bring her back as, someone who's going to back in cabinet to spearhead media reforms. Could be an interesting one, yeah. There we go. Oh, is it Em's birthday? Oh, happy birthday. Of course, when you get to my age, another birthday is just another year closer to going senile, isn't it, really? But it is also another year closer to when you're rude, not being rude, but having character. I don't know at what age that happens. What age does that happen? When you're no longer rude, you've just got character. But there comes a point. So it swings and roundabouts. You risk dementia, but you also get to be rude to people. But anyway, state pension amounts to 54% of the DWP budget, another 5% in other pension welfare. But what I mean is, like, all of it is basically spent on something that are big. Like, not everyone is using, like, there's a lot of money spent on the NHS, for example. Not everyone is using it on any particular time, but no one resents that spending. A few billionaires do. Not everyone resents the spending because they know it's there when they need it, right? Not everyone, money gets spent on schools. You get a few mirthless, childless people that resent that. But even education benefits them because then it trains people to do jobs for them, right? But anyway, most people don't resent spending on education because, again, they see the value in it. People see the value in spending in most government departments. But most people resent at least some of the spending from the DWP. It's a poison chalice of a job. And it doesn't matter whether the government's doing well or not, whether the economy's doing well or not, whether people are broadly happy with their lot in life or not. The sums are so huge, there's always a big chunk of key voters who resent it. David, they're saying every birthday is a year close to going senile from the day you're born. Yes, but there's a certain upward trajectory up until your late 20s. So up until your late 20s, the next year is going to be better than the last one. Hopefully, anyway, hopefully. These days, it's a bit trickier. But speaking in terms of like our physiologies, after your mid-20s, after your sort of late 20s, your brain's fully developed, your body's in its prime, it's all downhill from there. You can fight it off with good diet, of course you can, and doing Sudoku or playing the flute, but it's basically downhill. But on that positive note, I will leave you there. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day, and until next time, I'll see you later.